Jimmy Butler was wearing a $4,000 Tom Ford suit and carrying a Louis Vuitton bag when he walked into the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Chicago on March 15, 2019. He had just finished a game against his former team, the Bulls, and was looking forward to a quiet night in one of the city's most exclusive hotels. But within minutes of approaching the front desk, Jimmy found himself surrounded by 3 security guards and 2 police officers, his hands behind his back, being questioned about why he was really at the hotel. "Sir, we've had reports of suspicious activity," the lead security guard said, never bothering to ask Jimmy's name or why he might be there. "We're going to need to see some identification and proof that you have legitimate business at this establishment." Standing in that marble lobby, dressed better than most of the white guests walking freely around him, Jimmy Butler realized that no amount of success, no amount of money, no amount of respectability could protect him from the assumption that a young black man didn't belong in spaces reserved for the elite. That night would become a defining moment in Jimmy's understanding of how racism operates in America. Not just in obvious ways, but in the subtle, systemic ways that make success feel hollow when you're constantly reminded that some people will never see you as anything more than a threat. Before we dive into one of the most shocking examples of how racism follows black athletes even to the pinnacle of their success, you need to understand something. What happened to Jimmy Butler that night happens to successful black men across America every single day. This isn't just about basketball. This is about how prejudice and assumptions can strip away a person's dignity in seconds. The Ritz-Carlton Chicago was the kind of place Jimmy had dreamed of staying when he was homeless at 13, sleeping on friends' couches and wondering if he'd ever have enough money to feel secure. Now, at 29 years old, as a 4-time NBA All-Star making $20 million per year, he could afford to stay anywhere he wanted. But as Jimmy stood in that lobby, being treated like a criminal despite having done nothing wrong, he was reminded of a painful truth. In America, for many people, being black will always matter more than being successful. The incident that night wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a pattern of discrimination that had followed Jimmy throughout his career, from college recruitment to professional success. This is the story of how Jimmy Butler learned that fighting racism requires the same intensity he brought to basketball: relentless, unwavering, and absolutely refusing to back down. Jimmy had arrived at the Ritz-Carlton around 11 p.m. after the Bulls game, looking forward to room service before flying to Miami. He approached the front desk where a young white clerk looked up with immediate suspicion. "Can I help you?" the clerk asked, his tone suggesting help was the last thing he intended. "Yes, I have a reservation under Jimmy Butler," Jimmy replied, placing his ID and credit card on the counter. The clerk looked at the ID, then at Jimmy, then back. "Sir, I need to verify this reservation. Can you wait over there?" He pointed away from the desk. Jimmy found it odd but complied. After 10 minutes watching other white guests check in without verification, he returned. "Is there a problem?" Jimmy asked, still verifying. "Please wait." The clerk's tone became more dismissive. Jimmy noticed the clerk making a phone call while staring at him. Within minutes, security guards appeared, followed by Chicago police. "We've received reports of suspicious activity," the lead guard announced loudly. "We need to ask you some questions. The story you're about to hear shows exactly how racism operates in modern America. Not through burning crosses or segregated water fountains, but through assumptions, profiling, and the constant questioning of black people's right to exist in certain spaces. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell right now, because we're exposing the uncomfortable truths about how discrimination follows successful Black athletes everywhere they go. Every subscriber helps us share these important stories that mainstream media often ignores. What happens next in Jimmy's story will show you how he turned this humiliation into motivation, but it will also open your eyes to the daily reality that Black Americans face, regardless of their success or achievements. Don't miss it. Subscribe now. Standing in the lobby, surrounded by security and police, Jimmy felt every guest's eyes on him. He could see the assumptions. A young Black man questioned by authorities must have done something wrong. "What did you do?" one officer asked, as if Jimmy's presence was evidence of wrongdoing. "I didn't do anything," Jimmy replied calmly, despite rising anger. "I'm trying to check into my room. I'm Jimmy Butler. I play for the Miami Heat." The officer looked skeptical. "You got proof of that?" Jimmy showed his NBA profile, social media accounts, and photos in his Heat uniform. The guards examined everything like forensic experts, looking for reasons to doubt his identity. "This could be fake," one guard said. "Anyone can make fake accounts." "Call the NBA," Jimmy said, patience wearing thin. "Call the Miami Heat. Call anyone." What frustrated Jimmy most wasn't the verification. It was watching dozens of white patrons receive room keys without any verification during his 20-minute questioning. Before we continue with how Jimmy handled this humiliation, I need you to drop a comment below. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt judged or discriminated against because of how you looked? Jimmy's response to this treatment is about to teach you everything about maintaining dignity in the face of prejudice. This wasn't Jimmy's first experience with discrimination. Throughout his NBA career, he had been stopped by security at arenas where he played, questioned by police in upscale neighborhoods, and treated with suspicion in stores while spending thousands. "It doesn't matter how much money you make or how famous you become," Jimmy later told teammates. "To some people, you'll always be just another Black man who they think doesn't belong." Earlier that season, Jimmy had been stopped by security at his own practice facility because a new guard assumed he was some random guy trying to sneak in. At a Philadelphia restaurant, he was told there was a 2-hour wait, while white customers without reservations were seated immediately. Each incident followed the same pattern: assumptions based on race, increased scrutiny compared to whites in identical situations, and the burden on Jimmy to prove his legitimacy. "The worst part isn't individual incidents," Jimmy explained. "It's that they're so constant you start expecting them. You walk into any space where you're the only Black person knowing there's a good chance someone will question whether you belong." The hotel incident was particularly galling because Jimmy had specifically chosen the Ritz-Carlton for its reputation for excellent service. He had paid premium prices expecting premium treatment, only to be reminded that for some people, his race would always matter more than his money. The hotel incident brought back memories of Jimmy's college recruitment, when coaches used coded language expressing discomfort with his background. He remembered one prestigious university where the coaching staff made it clear players like him weren't what they wanted. "We're building a program based on character and values," the head coach had said. "We need players who fit our culture." Jimmy understood what culture meant. It meant white. It meant suburban. It meant players who wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable. They kept talking about wanting high-character guys, Jimmy remembered, but they really meant guys who looked and acted like their biggest donors, Black players who would be grateful and never challenge anything. When Jimmy asked pointed questions about playing time and style, he was called aggressive and confrontational. The same questions from white recruits were praised as showing competitiveness. I realized they didn't want the best players, Jimmy said. They wanted the most comfortable players. Players who wouldn't make their boosters nervous at fundraising dinners. Jimmy ultimately chose Marquette partly because Coach Buzz Williams had been honest about wanting players who brought intensity and weren't afraid to challenge teammates to be better. But the experience had taught him that success for black athletes often required navigating spaces where they weren't truly wanted. Back at the Ritz-Carlton, the situation escalated when the hotel manager arrived. Instead of apologizing for obvious profiling, he doubled down on staff actions. "Sir, we have security protocols," the manager explained. "When someone doesn't look like our typical guest, we have to verify identity." "What exactly does your typical guest look like?" Jimmy asked, voice rising despite efforts to stay calm. The manager realized he'd said something problematic. "What I meant was, when someone seems out of place, we have to be careful." "Out of place how?" Jimmy pressed. "I'm wearing a $4,000 suit. I have valid reservation and multiple IDs. What exactly made me seem out of place?" The manager couldn't answer because the honest answer was obvious. Jimmy seemed out of place because he was black. When Jimmy's identity was finally verified after nearly an hour, staff attitude changed completely. Suddenly they were apologetic, offering upgrades and complimentary services. But Jimmy understood their change had nothing to do with recognizing their mistake and everything to do with fear of bad publicity. "They weren't sorry for what they did," Jimmy said later. "They were sorry they did it to someone famous enough to cause them problems." The Ritz-Carlton incident was resolved, but it left Jimmy thinking about all the black men who faced similar treatment without fame and fortune protection. How many ordinary black Americans were subjected to the same assumptions without recourse? Jimmy researched and discovered this was part of a documented pattern. Studies showed black customers in upscale establishments were more likely to be questioned, followed by security, and have payment methods scrutinized. "I realized I was lucky," Jimmy said. "Most people who go through this don't have the platform to speak out. They just swallow the humiliation and move on." Jimmy began using social media to share these experiences, not for sympathy, but to educate about the reality of being black in America. He posted photos in expensive suits with captions about still being followed in stores. "People think racism is just slurs or burning crosses," Jimmy posted on Instagram. "But it's really about assumptions. Being treated differently because of how you look, no matter what you've accomplished." His posts sparked conversations among teammates and other players who shared similar experiences, creating broader dialogue about how successful black athletes still faced daily discrimination. Jimmy's willingness to speak openly about discrimination helped educate some of his white teammates about realities they had never considered. During a team meeting in Miami, Jimmy shared the hotel story and was surprised by his teammates' reactions. "I had no idea that stuff still happened," said one white teammate. "I thought once you made it to the NBA, that kind of treatment would stop." Jimmy used the moment to explain that success didn't provide immunity from racism. It just made the discrimination more subtle and harder to prove. He told them about being followed in stores while shopping for expensive items, about having his credit cards questioned when making large purchases, about being stopped by police in nice neighborhoods. "The hardest part is that people always have plausible explanations," Jimmy explained. The store clerk was just being cautious. The police officer was just doing his job. The hotel staff was just following protocol. But somehow these protocols never seemed to apply to white people. His teammates began noticing things they had previously overlooked. They saw how Jimmy was treated differently by arena security, by restaurant staff, by hotel employees. They witnessed interactions where Jimmy's presence was questioned while theirs was accepted without comment. "It opened my eyes to stuff I was completely blind to," said Tyler Harrow, a white teammate. "I started realizing how many times Jimmy had to prove himself in situations where I was just accepted automatically. Jimmy had developed strategies for dealing with discrimination that many successful Black Americans would recognize. He dressed impeccably when going to upscale establishments, carried multiple forms of identification, and had learned to document interactions with his phone when possible. I hate that I have to do it, but I dress differently when I go certain places," Jimmy admitted. "I wear expensive clothes and jewelry not because I want to show off, but because it's armor. It makes it harder for people to dismiss me as someone who doesn't belong." Jimmy also learned to control his reactions when facing discrimination. He had seen too many Black men labeled as aggressive or threatening for responding normally to disrespectful treatment. "You have to stay calm even when people are treating you terribly," Jimmy explained. "If you show any anger, even justified anger, it confirms their assumptions about you. It's exhausting, but it's survival." These defensive mechanisms came at a psychological cost. Jimmy found himself second-guessing normal interactions, wondering if poor service was due to racism or just bad customer service. He became hyper-aware of being the only Black person in certain spaces, constantly monitoring reactions and adjusting his behavior accordingly. "It takes energy away from everything else you're trying to do," Jimmy said. "You can't just exist normally. You're always thinking about how you're being perceived and how to make other people comfortable with your presence." The discrimination Jimmy faced outside basketball sometimes affected his performance on the court. After particularly frustrating incidents, he found himself playing with extra intensity, using his anger as motivation to dominate opponents. "When I've had a day where I've been treated like I don't belong somewhere, I take it out on whoever we're playing that night," Jimmy said. "It's like I'm trying to prove my worth all over again." His coaches noticed that Jimmy's best games often came after he had faced some form of discrimination or disrespect. The chip on his shoulder that had developed during his homeless teenage years was constantly being refreshed by new experiences of prejudice. "Jimmy plays like he's got something to prove every single night," said Eric Spoelstra, his coach in Miami. "I think part of that comes from constantly having to prove himself off the court, too." Jimmy's experiences also influenced how he approached leadership with his teammates. He became fiercely protective of younger Black players, preparing them for the discrimination they would face and teaching them strategies for maintaining their dignity. "I try to tell the young guys what to expect," Jimmy said. "Not to make them paranoid, but to prepare them. This stuff is going to happen and they need to know how to handle it without it destroying their confidence or their careers." Jimmy's openness about his experiences with discrimination helped spark a broader conversation within the NBA about racism and social justice. He became one of the most vocal players about these issues, using his platform to educate fans and advocate for change. During the 2020 season, when the NBA was emphasizing social justice messaging, Jimmy was one of the players who insisted that the conversation go beyond surface-level gestures. He pushed for substantive discussions about systemic racism and its impact on Black Americans. "Putting Black Lives Matter on our jerseys is nice," Jimmy said. "But what really matters is changing how Black people are treated in everyday situations. It's about the hotel clerk who assumes you don't belong. It's about the police officer who sees you as a threat first and a human being second." Jimmy also used his financial success to create opportunities for other Black Americans. He invested in Black-owned businesses, created scholarship programs for underprivileged students, and used his platform to highlight issues affecting Black communities. "Success gives you a responsibility," Jimmy said. "Not just to speak out about problems, but to do something about them. I can't change every racist person's mind, but I can use my resources to create opportunities for people who look like me." His activism wasn't without cost. Jimmy faced criticism from fans who wanted him to stick to basketball and from sponsors who were uncomfortable with his outspokenness about race issues. Jimmy's move to Miami in 2019 marked a turning point in how he dealt with discrimination. The Heat organization, led by Pat Riley, created an environment where Jimmy felt supported in speaking out about social issues. "Miami was different," Jimmy said. "They didn't just tolerate my activism, they encouraged it. They understood that supporting their players meant supporting all aspects of who they are." The Heat became one of the most vocal NBA teams on social justice issues, with Jimmy playing a leadership role in those efforts. The team organized community events, supported Black-owned businesses, and used their platform to advocate for policy changes. Jimmy's performance on the court reached new heights in Miami, and he credited part of that success to feeling supported as a complete person, not just as a basketball player. When you don't have to hide parts of yourself or stay quiet about things that matter to you, it frees you up to be better at everything, Jimmy explained. "I could focus on basketball because I knew my organization had my back when I spoke out about injustice." The 2020 NBA Finals run became Jimmy's platform to demonstrate excellence while maintaining his advocacy. His dominant performances against the Lakers, while wearing social justice messages on his jersey, showed that athletic excellence and social consciousness could coexist. "I wanted to show that you don't have to choose between being a great player and being an advocate for your community," Jimmy said. "You can do both, and doing both can make you better at each." Jimmy's willingness to speak openly about his experiences with discrimination inspired other athletes to share their stories. Social media became filled with accounts from successful Black Americans who had faced similar treatment in hotels, restaurants, stores, and other establishments. "Seeing Jimmy talk about this stuff made me realize I wasn't alone," said NBA player Jaylen Brown. "I thought maybe I was being too sensitive or reading too much into situations. But when you hear the same stories from so many different people, you realize it's a pattern." The hotel incident at the Ritz-Carlton also led to policy changes at several hotel chains. After Jimmy's story went viral on social media, hospitality companies began implementing sensitivity training and reviewing their security protocols to prevent similar incidents. "Change doesn't happen just because you complain," Jimmy said, "but when you have a platform and you use it consistently, eventually people start listening." Jimmy's advocacy also influenced younger players entering the NBA. Many cited his example as inspiration for using their platforms to address social issues rather than staying silent to avoid controversy. "Jimmy showed us that you can be successful and still speak out about injustice," said young NBA player Ja Morant. He proved that standing up for what's right doesn't hurt your career, it makes you more respected.